So, Čarna, you've written an article for Contemporary Southeastern Europe on humanitarian actions in Bosnia. So what is this, and how did you get interested in looking at this phenomena?
Yeah, well, humanitarian actions, or humanitarne akcije, refer to a practice of charitable or humanitarian help that is widely present across former Yugoslav countries, whereby hundreds of euros or hundreds of thousands of euros are raised for a single person's medical treatment abroad. So what usually happens is that someone needs a medical treatment that cannot be conducted in the country in which he or she lives. So their family member or relative would initiate a humanitarian action, and in order to try to raise enough money to cover the expenses of the medical treatment abroad. And my preliminary hypothesis or my initial assumption about these humanitarian actions was that by donating money, for instance, people would somehow reproduce something. So the people who donate a couple of euros to this family in order to go to get healthcare treatment abroad would reproduce their sense of belonging to a nation or to the state or to a class or to a social group of some kind. But when I started actually doing research in 2009 and 2010 in Jedina, a town in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and when I started following it, how these humanitarian actions actually were organized in everyday life and how they worked in practice, it turned out that it's much messier and more complex than I expected. So I had to rephrase my research goals, although my motivation maybe stayed the same.
So how do these work? How do these humanitarian actions actually work? So people raise money. How do they raise money? How do people respond? I mean, you've looked at several case studies. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more of these case studies you've looked at.
So basically what happens is a person who decides to start a humanitarian action would go to their closest family and friends to ask for a donation. And then they would try to think of a way to make a connection to as many people as possible. They would start organizing humanitarian sport events or humanitarian parties or humanitarian events of various kinds. They would go also to non-governmental organizations or private firms in order to ask for help, but they would not go to any kind of an NGO or any kind of a private firm. They would not necessarily apply for a program of social responsibility of telecom, let's say, but they would go to the enterprises where they had someone they could personally relate to, so where their friend or someone they were close to worked, and then the whole enterprise would make a collective donation to this person's personal bank account. So each person in a humanitarian action, and it's spread literally through like hundreds or thousands of people, would donate a very small amount of money, or 1 or 2 euros in total, but overall they managed to raise impressive amounts of money. And also, very importantly, people who organize humanitarian actions asked very often the state and public institutions for help. And sometimes, so the public healthcare funds, for instance, refunded parts of the expenses. But since this was a refund and not prior to the treatment, and since it was only partial most often, not the whole sum, it didn't help them very much and very often. And even in these public and state institutions, they would also try to find a personal connection. So there is an institution called the Municipal Committee for One-Off Support that distributed municipal money or money from the budget, from the municipal budget, to the personal bank account of the family.
So what does, I mean, because you're arguing, of course, that this sheds light on a broader picture in the way society functions in Bosnia, in terms of social relations, networks, as well as relation to the state. So how do you interpret this the rather particular phenomena and the cases you've observed?
What I'm trying to, exactly as, like you said, what I'm trying to do in the article is to look at how survival on the one hand and well-being were organized in this context. So how all these different actors, private and public and individual and so forth, were implicated in ensuring someone's survival and well-being. Most humanitarian actions were organized for a life-saving surgery abroad, but some were organized for eye surgeries or for things that are not necessarily affecting survival, but it can deeply affect well-being. This is why I'm putting these two terms, survival and well-being, together. And what I think, what I tried to do in the article is to say that there was no procedure that people who need medical treatments abroad could follow, and there was no one act or one thing that they had to do, or one person they could turn to get the help that they needed to survive or improve their well-being. So what they instead did was they tried to generate relations in every possible direction. So to generate this large network of relations in very different ways. So if people in Bosnia, with respect to official politics, let's say, are usually regarded as passive and not quite interested and so forth, when it comes to the issues of survival and well-being, they had to invest a lot of personal energy and a lot of time and effort, and to relate, to make effective engagements with different people in different levels of the society, let's say. So they had to be very active and very flexible. They had to move all the time. That's why I use this term Moveopticon in the title.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the other observation often made for Bosnia is that it's a low trust society mm-hmm. where people don't trust one another. But I mean, what you're describing is a phenomenon where people trust. I mean, they're giving money for a humanitarian cause to people they don't know in many cases, mm-hmm. or not directly. So how does that? What does that tell us about trust or about interpersonal relations in Bosnia? Is it a sign that there's a grassroots building up of society happening, of rebuilding trust, or how do you see your study fit into the larger picture of Bosnian often noted fragmentation after the war?
Quite optimistically, and I would love to follow that interpretation. This is an example of people starting to trust one another again. Mm-hmm. But I think that what happened actually in 2009 and 2010 at the time of my fieldwork was that people donated money to someone they personally knew. So it was, as one of my informants said, the who knows whom system. So trust was deeply interpersonal and entrenched in the already existing relationships. And very few donations were made by people who didn't know the family personally, or who could not relate to the family through someone else. And what I think these humanitarian actions actually show is the fragmentation of the power that structures the survival of well-being, not necessarily some form of grassroots building of trust.
Because it still remains personalized
exactly.
to a large degree. So you don't see it transcending beyond the personal networks.
No,
really.
Unfortunately, no.
Mm-hmm. So what is this? You introduced this. You mentioned this already earlier. This Moveopticon as a concept. What maybe you can tell us a little bit about this concept you're introducing through your article.
Mm-hmm. So it's a wordplay basically, and I got inspiration for it from two sources. One is obviously Foucault's concept of panopticon, which refers to this 19th century form of architectural form, which serves as a model of how power was structured in the 19th century Western European states. So it's like it's a model that somehow summarizes his argument about the wider distribution of power through society. And the other inspiration was an anthropologist called Brković, who, again, through a wordplay, coined the term panopticon to refer to the way in which power arrangements are organized in the late 20th and early 21st century in detention centers for immigrants across Europe. And I think a number of political philosophers and social scientists today show that, like Brković, Nancy Fraser, and many others, of course, show that power is not necessarily today distributed only in this capillary way through the society, in this imperceptible manner through among the members, legitimate members of a polity, so among citizens, but it also works among people who are on the borders of the polity, who are trying to enter, who are not necessarily members of this body politic. So power works somehow differently in different contexts. And with this term Moveopticon, I just tried to describe that in order to survive and improve well-being, people in Bosnia who were legitimate members of the polity actually had to to turn to everybody possible to get what they needed. So being just a member, as a Bosnian citizen, being just a member of the polity was not enough to secure survival or well-being. So that is what this term is supposed to capture.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Čarna, for talking to us. And
Thank you.
a lot more in the article, of course.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks.
very much.